Hey everyone, my name is PK, and here I have Michael Ong. This is a really cool story. Michael's got a property portfolio of $6 million that's net of debt. He's got a stock portfolio of $1 million, and together the passive income he generates, net passive income, depending on dividends, of course, as well, from year to year is about 150,000 ish on an annual basis. He migrated from the Philippines in the 90s to Australia, and his investing journey has meant that, he's not lying on the beach doing nothing, but it's allowed him to basically pick and choose the career, pick and choose the jobs, pick and choose what he does with his time according to his passions. So in this episode, I thought it'd be really cool to ask Michael his journey, where he started, why he started, what he thinks about the current market, what advice he has for people who are starting to invest or growing their portfolios today. Maybe we can go into some of the more macroeconomic influences that are going on in the world right now, obviously from Trump in the US to perhaps how the US dollar is faring down to our local economy with, different, let's say, Labor government versus the coalition's economic policies. We're not going into politics, but we're going into economics because Michael is extremely well educated and widely read and has really interesting perspectives. He's a very active community member in our Facebook group, Australian Property Mastery with PK. And I asked him to come on this because I thought he always has really valuable contributions. He's not a client of mine, but I think I think he will deliver a lot of value to the community at large. So thank you, Michael, for making time. I really appreciate it.
Most welcome and thanks for having me.
Welcome to the Oz Property Investment Mastery Podcast. My name's PK and I help busy people build passive income by buying top 5% growth and cash flow property and build a portfolio using data without wasting months doing research, spending weekends at inspection or catching flights, or dropping $10,000 to $20,000 on buyer's agents every single time. So if you're confused, lack confidence, and just overwhelmed with all the information and marketing misinformation available online and don't know where to start, then this show is for you.
Well, I mean, let's start from the start. Before we hit record, you said you migrated from the Philippines. You have Chinese ancestry. You've migrated into Australia in the 90s, with nothing really in terms of financial base. What was that like, and what was the kind of motive behind the move to Australia?
Yeah, so at that time, I wanted to stay in the Philippines, but I was actually engaged to someone who had moved to Australia, and she convinced me to move to Australia. I was a bit hesitant, so I just quit my job and moved across during a time when the recession was really bad in Melbourne. There was 17% unemployment, no jobs, but I was fortunate enough to land several job offers when I arrived, and I just worked my way up. And next thing you know, I was heading logistics for a large global company. By the time I was in my mid 20s, I got into property because I noticed that all my workmates back then in the 90s, they were just buying property. They were sharing houses and buying property, and we didn't have the same internet capability back then. So what I used to do, I used to go to old open houses, and I used to take note of the offers and the price, and I used to track them very manually. So I had a whole collection of these brochures you get when you do open houses, and that's how I track property. And I realized there was a trend within the suburb I was living in Melbourne, which is Armadale. I was renting a house there. Um, and I put in a few offers in my 20s, and I was always an underbidder because I was a little bit too scared. Then I moved to Sydney, so the company offered to fly me back and forth. And when I landed in Sydney, they used to put me up in Manly Pacific, overlooking the beach. And I thought, I found my home. This is where I'm going to live the rest of my life. Watching people, healthy people riding across. And when I transferred to Sydney, my boss said, Michael, just buy a property. And I just said, wow, Sydney is so much more expensive than Melbourne, but it doesn't matter. He told me buy in Penrith. I
Okay.
said, no, I don't want to drive over there back then, in the 90s. So I started looking in Mossman. That's where I was living. And it was during a time when I was chauffeuring for someone's wedding. I stumbled across this property. It was selling for 350,000. And I put in an offer of 290. I said, oh, you can't get it. Someone else offered 350. But then that fell through. And they called me back and they said, okay, we'll take your offer of 290. I said, no, it's now 270. It was a distress sale because something to do with a mistress and the guy. And he was, so I bought it for 270, rented it out for 350 a week. Can you imagine that yield was incredible? And then I got assigned to Germany for 2 years. I totally forgot about a property. And then I came back and I had this massive tax liability because it was possibly geared. At the time, being very naive, I didn't know that positive gear is actually very good. I always thought, isn't the idea is to actually have a tax write-off? Now I'm slapped with this. I'm just going to sell it. So I sold this, and I sold it for 450 after about 2 years.
That's
10 years,
crazy.
1999, 2001, 270 to 450. So I had this cash. My deposit was only 20,000. That's all I had. And then I said, okay, this property thing is pretty good. In the meantime, I lost 40,000 and got combust. I said, well, the way to go is property. So I bought in Willoughby something for 856 is the exact amount. So I was supposed to have a cap of 820, but my wife was attending the auction because I was doing my MBA class, and she just didn't have any limit, and she wanted a property as well. She did it initially because it was a federation house. And so we wanted, and the reason why we bought it, even though it was registered as our PPOR, the intention was to flip it because we could see the garden. People didn't see it. All you had to do is just paint the inside, remove the covers from 5 fireplaces and expose them, put floorboards and expand the deck. So while I was still working, my wife did all the internal renovations for about 20 grand. And then I went overseas again. So we didn't rent it out. We just had a house there because I didn't want to pay for capital gains tax again. And a few years later, we sold it for 1.2 million in Willoughby. Now, by the way, that property is now selling for 4 million, but that's a different story. So now I had $600,000 in cash, right? That was in early 2000s. That's a lot of money back then. And I could sense that the stock market was going to crash. And I was thinking initially of renting and putting in a stock market. Good thing I didn't do that. I would have lost everything in the GFC stock market crash. So instead, I said, I'm just going to buy a property. So I went over to Chestwood, which is the house I'm in now, and I saw it's totally undervalued. I mean, I was just looking. Mossman is 2 million. Willoughby was 800,000, went to 1.2 million. I could see the transition of the people who wanted to live in Mossman were being pushed out into the other aspirational suburbs. And like Chestwood back then, there's a bit of crime, right? It's not like the place to be when you have $5 million and you want to pocket in a suburb. That's what it is now. So bought there, and I did something really I would never do in my life, which I really like this house. I could see it's our forever home. And I was bidding against a guy from Perth. Pre-auction, he wanted to put something in because Perth people don't like auctions. And I said, okay, I'll take it out of the market. What will it take to take it out of the market? And the agent said, $1 million. And I was in a car driving. I said, I'll make $1,030,000. You know, it could have gone for 900, but I didn't care. I had 600,000. I didn't know where to park the money. I needed to park somewhere. So then I had a 400,000 loan. That's easy. So I got assigned in good jobs, so I paid it off pretty quickly. And then my son was born. I wanted to just spend time with him. I'd been traveling when he was born, and he had a problem with his feet, so he couldn't actually walk until about 2 years old. So I said, okay, I'm going to spend a lot of time with him, teach him sports so he could play with the kids. I had visions of him not being able to assimilate in school because of his club feet. So because of I was ahead in my mortgage, pretty much almost fully paid off. I took 2 years off and I became um a stay at home dad, teaching him soccer. And he next thing you know, he's a phenomenal athlete, and he made it to um the National Premier League club. And he was like the star player in every. He was the captain of his high school. He could do anything. But because of his club feet problems, eventually he had to drop out of soccer and he switched to tennis, and he did really well in tennis. So he pushed it. He was winning 2 years above his age group, but then also because of his ligament problem, he had to drop out of sports. But even though he was phenomenal, and he got into business, which he's making a lot of money now. He'd be, I would say, top 1% earner right now. He's only 20 in university from his business. But I look back and I go, if I didn't invest in property, my life wouldn't be where it is right now, because I had so much capacity to do anything. I wasn't struggling. I didn't have to get any job. I only did jobs that I wanted to do. I became a consultant, so I did interesting projects that paid well. And if it didn't pay well, I would just write it out and just live on my savings at that time. And at the same time, because of the success, I made a very big mistake in my life, which I thought, because property I bought at 1 million was now like 1.5, 1.6. I thought, this is crazy. This can go higher. Like 15 years ago, this was 500,000, and now Chatswood is like 2 million. That is crazy. So I totally stayed out of the property market for 15 years. I was cashed up. I even did a renovation, paid cash, bought cars. Everything was cashed. Right? Can you imagine sitting on 500,000 between 2010 and 2023 and more than that, and not buying property? And then I saw your video, PK, during COVID. It's nothing else you can do except watch videos. I go, is this guy for real? I was thinking, hey, wait, there's something wrong. The world's changing. If you don't have property, you're going to be locked out forever. And what's going to happen to my son? He can be earning $500,000 a year, but if he doesn't have property, it's nothing, right? So I said, I got to protect his future as well. So, I asked around in the office, people working for me, they all had properties. Like this lady, she was an admin person. She had 6 properties and she almost paid off her debt. And I said, how do you do this? She invested in Queensland. She invested in Tasmania in 2015. It's like, I'm all places I never thought of investing outside of my little 3 kilometers radius. I only know in North Shore. But watching your video, I actually pinged you if you remember that. And I said, you can't do things online. And you send me about 10 websites that you could do and research, and you could do everything online, which I did. So I bought in Central Coast, like after 1 month of actually joining your group. Then I read about, I was looking at your YouTubes about Armadale in Perth. And I go, I missed the boat, but I'll go up to where it hasn't boomed yet. So I bought in Butler. And that was really funny. It was about exactly a year ago. So there was a US investor who had bought it when the dollar was parity with the Aussie dollar. So he would have lost money. And I think that person was actually wanted to get out and sell it when the dollar was still 70 cents. Right. So he was losing from a foreign exchange, was based in New York. And I was a cash buyer. So I told the real estate, I was paying all these in real estate. What I do is I actually flag all the properties I'm interested in. I track them. I actually look at the actual sales, right? And I go, hey, there's a trend here in the northern beaches of Perth. And when I saw this come up, it was a Friday evening. I actually sent a message via real estate to the agent who happened to be inspecting the property at the time. And he called me back within minutes. And then within minutes, we were doing a video interview. I mean, inspection. And I liked the house. And I said, I'm going to give an offer. So he said initially it was 650 above. And I go, 651. And he said, he put it to the vendor. And he said, yeah, you got to go higher. Okay, 652. And the vendor goes 690. And I go, I have another property, which is true. I'm looking at Tasmania. I'll let you know. And he said, okay, so um, I'll close. I won't have the first open inspection on Sunday if you can actually close the deal on Saturday. He said, that's fine. I'll let you have the open inspection and I'll let you know on Monday morning. So we clinch the deal at 660, which was good because it was a 5-bedroom big house, 2 kilometers from the beach. And it had a tenant of 610 a week. And as soon as we settled over there in last year in around April this time, and then he actually offered, said, I have a buyer if you're keen, I can buy it off you 780. Says no. And then so I kept it, I still have it. And the property manager said, look, it's under rented. You need to increase your rent. So we increased the rent to 700. So it's now pretty much evenly geared. And I'm pretty confident this is a solid brick house by the beach. Just going to go higher. And I can see the demographics. I look at the demographics as well. I look at who are the people moving in. These are all owner occupiers, right? They are, and there's so much good infrastructure in the north of Perth. It takes you fast train. It goes 100 k's per hour into the city. You're there in like 25 minutes.
Mhm.
Yeah, the best of both worlds. So that's my journey. So now I'm looking for a third property. It's a little bit difficult because my mindset is the success I had in the past. I'm slow to accept higher prices. In reality, it always goes higher. But that's the thing. I'm a conservative investor. Yes, so that is my journey. And with shares, I invested about 300,000. It's now 1 million. So it's not as good as property. Nowhere near as good as property. Total money I spent on properties maybe 600,000, and net worth is 5-6 million. Versus shares 300,000, it's gone up to 1 million. But the good thing about shares, it's the dividend I can reinvest. But I wouldn't suggest it to anyone. I like numbers. I can stare at numbers forever, and I can connect numbers. Not many people can do that. So I wouldn't advise it. Like very few people can do what I do with shares, and very few people can put a $500,000 position and sleep and beat down 50,000, knowing that you're gonna be out 200,000, right?
Yeah.
So property is the way to go. That's my advice to the younger people. I started with property.
Right.
Yeah.
Why did you buy like a affordable property in Perth? Why didn't you buy something more blue chip? Because you can, you have the financial wherewithal to buy something a bit more expensive, a bit more closer to the city, maybe in, like on an East Coast capital city. A lot of people sometimes say you should, if you have the borrowing capacity, if you have the deposit or cash, let's say, buy something as close to the city, especially like in Sydney or Melbourne or Brisbane. I don't say this, but people say this. Like, why didn't you do that? Why did you buy something relatively affordable across the other side of the country?
Yeah. So there's a few things. First is risk, right? When the higher you go, the more money you can make, but the more money you can lose because you can be buying a property for $3 million, and you might have two crazy buyers and they'll buy it off you for 6 million. But then you can actually have years of no one wants your property.
Yeah.
Then you'll be paying all this interest, right? Holding costs. And I'm not in a position where I can actually afford to have a very high holding cost waiting for that two crazy buyers to outbid each other. But the other thing is, I come from middle class, and I know the middle class, right? We're all aspirational. So we all want to live in Vaucluse or Scarborough or, let's say, Melbourne and in Brighton. But then eventually we actually get pushed out. So we actually move to a cheaper suburb, like in Melbourne, we Beaumaris, or instead of Toorak, we move to Armadale. In Sydney, you can see it like people who can afford most money will go next door to Willoughby, right? Um, and so I play the aspirational game, right? So people who are upwardly mobile, they want to have the upper class lifestyle, but they can't. So what they do is they move into suburbs which are like working class, like Willoughby, for example, was immigrants, um, Armenian, Italians. They had this funny, tacky, uh, piano leg kind of designs. But what happened was, is now you go to Willoughby 20 years later, it's all high class, upper class suburb. And then people say, "Oh, you're so lucky you bought an upper class suburb 20 years ago." No, not really. It was a working class suburb. It was, like wrong side of the road.
Yeah.
If you're a Muslim and you go, "Oh, Willoughby, I don't want to know you." But that's where so when the economy goes up, the biggest jumps will be in aspirational suburbs. Now, what happened in Perth, I think you actually pointed it out, is the opposite. It started off with the Armadales and Gosnells, the Mandras, the lower class. Now, what I could see what happened was the Perth people who invest in those areas, they go, "Oh, thank you. Thank you, Eastern board investors. You just bought my property, which I bought for 100,000. You bought it, and now it's being jacked up by buyers agents into 500, 600,000. They're taking that money and then upgrading to the beachside suburbs." So I actually went to Perth and I attended it, spoke to a few people. They had investments in those areas, and they're so happy because now they're actually investing and they're close to the beach, right? Um, on the other hand, the Eastern board people, they have so much equity, and they look at first, they go, "This is a mispriced city, totally mispriced city." Because first people, they're into lifestyle. Only one person really works. They're the wealthiest people, but they don't have the same attitude as Sydney people. Let's make property a financial asset. Now they're learning, because now they're learning. They're also investing now. But that's why I think Perth, in my view, is the last frontier among all the capital cities. Now it's going to be suburb picking, arbitrage. That's how to make money. It's no longer, look at Perth, they're so clueless about what's happening with the property market. It's
Yeah.
just going
I
on.
think they just forgot about property as an investment class, for better or worse, because of what happened in the mining bust. And now that that spark is reignited, and you're right. I think a lot of people say at the moment that the affordable suburbs, like let's say Armadale, etc., Kelmscott, etc., and Perth, are not doing so well, and I think that's true to some extent. But now it's the sort of 600K to $1 million bracket that, I mean, it's not growing at 25% per annum, but it's not doing badly either. There's some good pockets to still make a lot of money. So it's the opposite of what we normally see in a property cycle, like you pointed out. Normally, it's the top end that goes first, and the
Mm,
idea is to invest in a gentrifying suburb. Perth is a little bit patchy, a different sort of outlook at this time. Michael, you made a comment before that I think it was in the 2000s, or I can't remember when you were referring to, that you couldn't see how, like, the property market could continue going up at that rate because it had gone up so rapidly, especially around that year 2000, leading up
mm,
to I would say, like, sort of 1997 up to sort of 2004, 2005, especially the East Coast, it did really well. Melbourne, Sydney, but property prices are so high now compared to what they were back then. And you thought that back then. What would you say to folks using your, let's say, 30 years of experience now, or at least the 30, 35 years of experience of observing the market? What would you say to folks who are like, the market has gone up so much, like, we've had so many booms. There's no way there can be another boom or 2 booms or 3 booms. There's no way that in 10 years' time, property market can be double in value or triple or even 70% up. Affordability, this and that and the other thing. What's your thoughts on that?
Uh, Overall, I know people think I'm crazy. I still think Australian property is undervalued. And then I know people think I'm crazy, but I still think that Australia is the best government. Property prices actually a reflection of how things are governed. I mean, the reason why property in Gaza will be very cheap or non-existent is because there's a war there, right? The reason why property in Australia will continue to boom is because it's a safe place. So you buy property because it's safe and it caters to your lifestyle. Now, the uh, the factors that will increase the house prices different from what it was before. So in the 90s, we came from a protectionist tariff, higher tariff environment. Um, and then we went through globalization, and then we also reduced rates. And then we went from what was standard before 10-year loans to 20 to 30-year loans. We went from single income to double income. So basically, the borrowing capacity increased, pushed prices up. Globalization brought wealth into Australia, and a mining boom. The factors that will drive property to the next boom, other than the transgenerational, intergenerational wealth transfer, because what will happen is grandma will leave $5 million to 10 grandkids. They'll go $100,000 each. They'll use as deposit into, and it has an exponential effect. But the other one is the safety. So talking to some people, so my wife was talking to some people in Europe, in Germany, and they're worried about the war. So my sister lives in Switzerland, and she's retired, and she also spends time in Portugal because it's nice and sunny. But she's been given by the Swiss people a guideline. She needs to be able to survive for 72 hours in case of a war. So every Swiss citizen has been given a guideline. This is what happens. Just so Europe is now in this tension where Trump has said, you want us to address our trade deficit, then we will no longer be subsidizing you and protecting you and paying for your military. So he's telling Germany, you wanted a war in Ukraine, so you solved that. You spent $250 billion. So what's Germany doing? They, for the first time, said, there's no limit to defense spending. We're going to increase the borrowing limit to no ceiling. In the meantime, the Germans are actually quite scared, so they might get conscripted. So they're now looking at, see, this is what I heard from just talking to people. They might look at Australia as a safe haven, right? Now, anywhere in the world, if you are high net worth individual, where are you going to go? You're going to go to Australia, New Zealand, right? Where else is there no conflict? So one thing I'll give the Australian government is its ability to, I wouldn't say fence it, but being aligned, but not being aligned, right? I mean, there are people who want to be totally aligned to China. Some want to be aligned to the US, but the reality is we're managing the diplomacy so well that it's actually a safe haven. So there's no interest in anyone to wage war with Australia. The Chinese love Australia. Americans love Australia. Um, and that's why property will go up. But the other thing is Australia is really good at creating wealth. Okay, it's a mining boom. They can pivot to another industry. I'm confident about that. They could easily go into high-end manufacturing, and they demonstrated that South Australia is actually producing some of the armaments for NATO because they're very good welders. They're very good in precise manufacturing. Right. South Korea bought into Austal, which is actually another shipbuilding company in South Australia, because they're de-risking their military production into Australia as well. Well, China bought the Port of Darwin, which Australians are going to take back from them. But you see, everybody is looking at Australia as a safe haven because it's very well governed, in spite of what every Australian whinges is about. And it's a reflection. I also see the regional. So just as much as the eastern border people took over property in the major cities, there's a lot of equity sitting in the capital cities that are actually going to spill over into regional. I'm hoping one day they're going to develop the regional cities. I mean, if you look at America, you have tiny cities that are powerful, like Cincinnati. What's the population of even San Francisco, where you're based? The population is so tiny, right? There's no reason why tiny cities can flourish, right? It's just that the Australians need to have this mindset taken away that, oh, Sydney and Melbourne, why not? Like Gold Coast is booming now, right? Why not set up companies in the Gold Coast or even Launceston, Tasmania? Or I could see Perth as being a digital nomad's place, just like Malaga in Spain. It has the same kind of attraction. So I'm pretty confident. So I don't look at the factors in the past and go, they're going to replicate in the future. There'll be different factors. But property is still the way to go. So I'm going to start divesting my shares, um, and start looking. I'm still looking for a property, but the challenge is it's no longer the same opportunities you had, let's say Perth. Now you got to be a little bit more astute. You got to look at the details, right? Not at the macro level. Now it's actually down to the suburb level, right? And now you have to understand economics, and you have to look at the plans of government infrastructure to be able to assess and to pick the right investments.
Yeah, what a great answer. No, I really like the way that you answered that. I'm curious your thoughts on, one thing you said before was the triggers for property rising in value in the past will be different to the triggers that may cause property to rise in the future or the present. For example, double incomes, deregulation, increase in borrowing capacity on the back of that, globalization. Now there's a rise in nationalization, or not nationalization, but nationalism, or uh, you know, more protectionism, less free trade. Let's see where that goes. I mean, short term tariff rates, X% or Y%, they don't have a long term impact, because they change. But definitely the trend is going that way. And not to get into politics for politics' sake, but even after the Trump term, it's quite likely that there's another Republican government that has Trump-esque flavor, right? And, it could be a macro theme, let's say hypothetically for the next decade or more in the US. And if that is the case, then, well, one benefit is that every country needs to then look out for number one because you don't have this kind of big brother mood or vibe. Australia needs to invest in its own defense force more so than it does right now, and take, not rely on the US to save it, so to speak. every country needs to think about its own consumer base to ensure that they're not relying on exports alone for the welfare of their economy. It needs to be more self-sufficient, sort of ecosystem within the boundaries of their nation. With these kinds of trends going forward, and potentially the US dollar losing, let's say, some of its traditional gravitas, that could mean a whole host of changes for things like commodity prices, iron ore, gold. Gold may continue to go up, kind of reminiscent of pre-1970s. It could be that oil, it fluctuates wildly. And these uncertain times, I think from a macro perspective, it's always uncertain. Any given year, there's always uncertainty, but I'm going to go on out and limb and say that there's more uncertainty now than there was perhaps 10 years ago. Um, how do you think investors should think about that? Because on one side of things, it's like, oh, I'm super scared about putting my money into something that could drop. I'm just gonna park it in fixed income, park it in the bank, term deposits, safe stocks, even, blue chip stocks for whatever that means. And then you have some people that will kind of recognize what you're saying, Michael, recognize the opportunity, continue to put it in real estate and, hopefully make a lot of money as well. But how should people approach this? Because I think young people these days, especially in their 20s and their 30s, they're just so confused. It's hard to live, especially if you're in Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane. Cost of living is high. Real wages haven't gone up that much. Really difficult to buy their own home. They have to make these investment decisions, and there's so much information out there, more than what you had, like you were saying 30 years ago. How should someone approach this?
Yeah. First is recognizing the one thing about property, right? I mean, you have cars, you can invest in gold, and you can invest in shares. At the end of the day, if you think about all the things that you buy, they need land, right? If you invest in energy, you need the land to get the gas. Or even renewables, you need the land to put a solar panel. Gina Reinhardt and Andrew Forrest, they're actually just real estate people. They own iron ore. They went there and they got the mining rights. And they own all this land. It's real estate, right? You need land to grow agriculture, right? So at the end of the day, we live in this earth. The earth has a certain circumference and a certain land area. And in a way, we're destroying it, which is sad. Every time we build a farm, we have to deforest it, right? So at the very macro level, the number one input to any production is land, right? So that's how we have to view it. Land is what everybody needs. So by definition, how can land go down in value when everything that you think will go up uses land anyway? So that's the first thing.
Amazing.
The second thing is income stream, right? So you're in the top 1%, you earn $375,000 a year, right? Income. Let's say you have a $2 million portfolio net of debt. That 2 million will appreciate on average 6 to 7% a year for the next 10, 20 years. Just imagine, and that's compounding. So 7%, 2 million, 140,000. So now you have 2,140,000, and then 7% of that. So all you have to do is just own $2 million worth of property, right? And you're going to get, after a few years, you're going to earn more than the top 1%. Exponentially. At some point, you'll earn as much as that. And the next few years, and the exponential growth is really like a very steep curve. It starts off flat. As a property investors, you can look, oh, my property going 1 million to 1,050,000, but then exponentially, the next thing you know, it just adds 200, $300,000 a year without doing anything. Okay, so you can slave away and try to hit the top job that many do, and you make 1% salary, or you can buy all this property and exponentially it just leverages. Yeah. Now with the young people, I had a discussion just yesterday with my son. He makes a lot of money. He has part of his business is incredible. He just gets contracts to maintain gardens in the North Shore, which is very expensive, and clean pavers and stuff. But he doesn't do the work. He just contracts. He's a very good deal maker and he hires people, very good margins. And he said, properties, shares, he can make 30%. I said, yeah, it's true. But just think about it. You have $200,000, 30% of 200,000, right? Is 60,000. Now, if you put 200,000 and buy, you leverage on 80% LVR, you get 1 million. That's 70,000. There you go. Right. And then it compounds, right? While with shares, you just get an income and you'll probably spend it. But this one is a forced savings, it's a forced compounding. So what I do tell them is, so you have to have two income streams. One is the sure income stream, sure growth, which is property. Then you also have to have a sure income of passive income. When everything else fails, you have this passive income.
Mhm.
Then you have the risk, which is your business, your career, your shares, or things like I made a lot of money in GFC. I bought the lowest date of the GFC. I bought it and I doubled my shares. I bought just before COVID. I sold all my shares and bought it back a few months later. So there's an opportunity, but you can only do that if you have a base wealth,
Mhm.
right? So even if it's your PPOR, if you have $1 million in equity, worst comes to worst is you sell it and go and live in Armadale, Gosnell, of course. But it's the surety that you give that allows you to actually take risk in other areas. But you need a foundation. Don't just go for the high risk, because then you're just playing a casino, right? So I mean, just think about it long term. Is there any property that's not worth more triple from it is now from compared to 10 years ago? If you go into the ASX 200, you look at the top companies in ASX 200. They don't exist anymore 20 years ago. Right. So you have to pick the right companies, and that's crazy. Property, you can be a very big, bad property picker, but over 10 years, you're going to make money.
Yeah.
And that's what I say. Of course, you try to ride the boom so you get equity straight away, and then you can invest more as opposed to buying per 2010 and you couldn't do anything until 2025.
Yeah.
Right. So ideally, you're also good in timing the market. So you buy in pairs in 2021, and then you go into the next boom, and then you can exponentially expand your portfolio. Now, I didn't have that. I didn't have a PK YouTube back then. So I confined myself to what I knew, which is 3 kilometer radius in the North Shore of Sydney. It's
Yeah.
only lately I just realized that, hey, the tools today are okay. So the opportunities are farther, but the tools today are much bigger. So 20 years ago, you had to do what I had to do: go to every open house, take brochures, write them down, take a note of them. Now you just go to YouTube, realestate.com, Core Logic. It's easy.
Right. Right. No, great answers. Thanks for, making it so structured in the way you've answered it. Last couple of questions, if you don't mind, real quick. What's your plan, Michael, for the next, let's say we're recording this in 2025, your portfolio across the both asset classes around 7 million, 150K passive. Where do you want to be in 10 years time, and how are you going to go about doing that?
Yeah. So my aim is to increase my passive income to about about 3 or 4 years time to 400,000. So now I'm actively looking for another property. I'll focus on growth and cash flow. I still have my share portfolio, which is fine. But I also think that over time, the rents will go up if you pick the right properties, right?
Mhm.
And I always have a share portfolio because there's quick returns. But when you grow your asset base, you can actually use your cash flow to borrow more. So at some point, it should be not relying on my salary, but on my passive income to be able to leverage and to buy more. So I don't look at too far ahead. This is where I want to be 10 years from now. That's right. But I'm just focusing on the here and now in terms of what's the next property that I need to buy. That's what I'm doing now. And then once I do that, like I bought Perth, I bought Central Coast, I bought Perth, and I'm looking for another one. So every year I need to be actively looking. So for the next 3 or 4 years, I'm trying to buy a property every fiscal year.
Love it.
Right.
I love that. Um, and last question for me. I really liked it towards the start of the session how you were sharing how you took 2 years off, and spent those times that time with your son to teach in sports and so many other things. I'm sure as well. I think that really caught my attention and respect as well. Um, and then, of course, your son's gone on to be so successful in so many things, not excluding business and sports in his own right, and I'm sure many other things as well. A selfish question from me. My son's 6 years old. What sort of advice do you have to give to a dad on how to raise, sons or daughters, or but all rounded folks. Folks that are following some sort of passion. As a father, stoking or fanning that spark. Any words of wisdom from you?
Number one is someone told me when he was being, I don't know what's Christianized or baptized, whatever.
Baptized?
They said he, Frederick is my son's name, will be his own person. He's not an extension of yourself, right? So we can't project our desires and our ambitions to our child and protect them. We just spend time with them and love them, know that they're loved, encourage them, right? So they will find their own path. And without telling them, they're going to look at certain values that you display in your day to day life, and they'll pick up those values. So spend time with them. Um, and it's the best thing that you could do because that's what life is all about. As you progress, as you get older, like myself, it's all about the legacy you leave as opposed to achieve. You move from achievement oriented life to a legacy oriented life. And that's what I want to do. I have more joy seeing the success and the failures of my son. I don't intervene. I have opinions, but he doesn't want to listen to my opinions on what I've done in my life. He just wants me to listen to him and his achievements. So in a soccer field, you don't tell them, "Oh, you did great. You're the best player." No, you actually just are there, right? You're there for them. Let the coaches tell your son what he needs to improve and what his talents are. Let the world tell them. As a parent, I would just say, just know that they're loved. They're encouraged, and you give them structure in their lives and let them find their own talents.
Wonderful advice. I heard something similar as well. Someone was saying that you don't need, in a specific example, when a kid is small, they were saying you don't even need to necessarily play with them. Of course, you should play with them, but he was just using this example. Just sit next to them and observe them play. And for them, knowing that you are giving them your full attention and just being there, that for them is as satisfying and as fulfilling and nurturing than if you were like, like actively trying to do something with them, give advice, this and that. They just want you to be there, know that you got their back, regardless of who they become or what they do. So I match that with what you've just said, and it marries up really nicely. Well, we'll probably end it there, Michael. It's really awesome, actually, to speak with you. It's really nice to speak with experienced investors. People who've been through multiple property cycles. Of course, we can analyze the data across different property cycles, 50 years plus, and reverse engineer why this went wrong, that went right, and then what lessons we can learn. But there's a special charm and special wisdom in hearing it from a person who's lived through it himself or herself. And so I really appreciate that from you. And I think you're very balanced. And for anyone who's watching or listening, you know, these Facebook group that we have, Australian Property Mastery, it's got like some fantastic people like Michael, and you should really, reach out to them or at least ask some questions, on the Facebook group because there's kind of, like you said, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, there was very little ability to connect with those who are further along the path than you. We're very fortunate that we can connect with people like Michael. So make the most of it. Thank you. I really appreciate you making time, and yeah, hope to meet you in person one day too.
Yeah, me too. Thank you very much, PK.
All right, thanks, Michael, and thanks everyone for watching or listening. Hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, and share it as well. Maybe share it with people who have differing views. Share it with people who are kind of on the fence on property. Share it with people who are very uncertain. Michael's positive and even keeled disposition, I think, will really benefit them. Thank you for being part of the community, and thanks again, Michael.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye.